Morning, it is Thursday, May 13th, 2010. Now, I just made a video yesterday about Greece and the protesters down there. And I had several people commenting about my video. And they're saying, so do you support the banks in this instance? And I guess I didn't make myself clear enough. No, absolutely not. I don't think the banks are in the right in this situation. Let me just explain a little further how I feel about this. Yes, the Greek government has made some awful decisions as far as all these entitlement programs. They've borrowed too much money, they've spent too much money, and that's why I was blaming a lot of the Greek government and saying that the protesters should be mad at the government. However, it was the bankers who loaned them that money and took the risk. They made a bad bet. They loaned them too much money that the Greeks obviously are unable to pay back. The Greeks were not given enough warning, I suppose, that a crisis was looming, although a lot of people were predicting this. And so the banks are in the wrong here too for loaning them that money. They made a bad bet. Here's what needs to happen. We don't need to bail out the banks. I'm 100% against this idea of a bailout from the IMF and from the European Union. What needs to happen is Greece needs to default on their debt. That would be a positive thing. That would allow Greece to restructure their debt, and the banks would then have to take a loss. They made a bad bet. They made bad loans, loans that could not be paid back. Obviously, Greece is at the point now where they know they're not going to be able to pay it back. So yeah, Greece is going to have to take a hit with these austerity measures, which I do support. I don't support an IMF coercion for Greece to do these measures, but I do. They need to cut back, whether IMF tells them to or not. They're going to have to do it anyway. But the bankers should take a loss on this too, because they made a bad bet. So no bailouts. If I gave the impression I supported these banker bailouts, I didn't mean to. I mean, the banks are in the wrong here too. I'm against the IMF. The United States should leave the IMF. What's going on here is these bailouts, this $1 trillion bailout. I think it's even going to be more than that now. I mean, all this money is being thrown down this black hole. Who's getting all this money? The Greeks aren't getting the bailout money. The banks are. And so, I mean, this is, in a lot of ways, this is fraud. And the U.S. taxpayer is being asked to provide billions of dollars. I think it's like upwards of $60 billion to bail out the banks. I mean, they keep saying to bail out Greece. Well, we're not really bailing out Greece. We're bailing out the banks. Greece should default, and that debt should be restructured. The banks should take a loss. We don't need to bail out the banks. They've made plenty of money as it is. They loaned money they should not have. They encourage countries like Greece to adopt these measures and to borrow money. So the banks are at fault here just as much as the Greek government. The reason why I was focusing on the Greek government is because a lot of these protesters are not protesting the right thing. Yes, they're protesting the banks, and that's good, but they want to continue this entitlement culture. And we cannot continue, these countries cannot continue to throw all this, to borrow and spend all this money in order to ensure that their citizens retire at age 53. It's unreasonable. A lot of these protesters want to continue that system, and that's why I was critiquing them. But they are absolutely right to be mad at the banks. This is a practical robbery. It's theft. It's a legalized form of fraud. Goldman Sachs is behind this. I mean, all the big banks are behind this. So yes, there's a lot of fraud going on. But the Greeks still need to cut down on their budget. And the protesters I've seen so far are not in favor of that. Now, I might be wrong. But most of the protesters I've seen have been union-led, and they're not liberty-loving, anti-bank protesters that we've seen at the Tea Parties and so forth. So I just wanted to clear that up. I'm sure there's a lot of great anti-bank protesters in that crowd, but a lot of these protesters are socialist unionists. I saw a lot of hammer and sickle flags. I mean, a lot of these people are communists. So, okay, yeah, you might say, oh, but they're protesting the bank, and that's good, and I agree, but at the same time, we have to remember that they are also supporting this entitlement culture, and that needs to go down. So anyway, I hope that cleared things up. I'm not pro-bank by any means. We need to audit the Fed. We need to abolish the Fed as far as I'm concerned. And last point, I mean, what's going on in Greece is what we're seeing right now is the collapse of paper money as the world standard. Gold and silver has been money for thousands and thousands of years, and it has not been, and was that way until the 20th century. Since 1971, for 40 years, the world has been on a pure paper standard. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency. The US dollar used to be on a gold standard, which effectively made all the other currencies on a very limited gold standard. And the Bretton Woods Agreement and all that stuff makes it more complicated. I'm just simplifying things. But since 1971, when the dollar abandoned its last tiny connection to gold, the world has been on a pure paper standard, and so what we're seeing right now is a collapse of that paper system, that paper regime. Greece, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, United Kingdom, Europe, United States. So I'm not pro-bank, believe me, I'm not pro-bank, and I think what the IMF is doing is awful. I think that these banker bailouts are horrible, but at the same time, I don't agree with the communist protesters who want to continue this entitlement culture. We have to abandon that as well, and it sucks that the IMF is forcing them to do it. The Greek people should do it on their own. They shouldn't be forced into doing it. So, and another thing, what the IMF is doing, they're forcing this austerity bill. But they're also forcing Greece to raise taxes, and that's really going to kill economic growth. So that's one aspect of the austerity measures that the IMF is forcing on the Greeks that is bad. A sharp increase in taxes. Greece should be lowering their taxes, cutting spending drastically. Greece should abolish all of these labor regulations, all these workplace regulations that have driven business away from their country. Maybe even get rid of the minimum wage. I don't know. I mean, there are drastic measures that Greece needs to take. Raising taxes is not one of them, and bailing out the banks is certainly not another one of those. So, anyway, hope that cleared things up. I'm at school right now. That's why I've got a different backdrop behind me. But I hope to see you guys soon, and talk to you later. Bye.